What's up, everybody? This is Dante Fortson. I'm here with another edition of Addressing the Evidence, Part 4, Judah and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, make sure you click the subscribe button. Make sure you click the thumbs up button. And if you want to receive notifications whenever I put out a new study, click the bell. If you are on blackhistoryinthebible.com, make sure you like and share and subscribe. If you subscribe to blackhistoryinthebible.com, you do get a free book. Make sure you click the subscription confirmation link in the email. For those of you who want to support, I do have Patreon. That's patreon.com/Dante Fortson. I also have Cash App, PayPal, and you can always buy books if you want to support. For those that don't have it financially and still want to support, like and share these videos. It is much appreciated. So today's study is going to be brought to you by Undeniable. You've heard me talk about it before. Full color evidence of Black Israelites in the Bible. It's UA kryptonite. It forces them to deal with the evidence. It's kryptonite to Eurocentric Christian theology. It forces them to deal with the evidence. And the second book is The Black Hebrew Awakening, The Final 400 Years as Slaves in America. Some of you may recognize this from Urban Apologetics Exposed Part 3. This is the book that Vocab Malone, the cover that he put in his video dealing with the other Israelites when he tried to associate me with them, even though I make it clear that I'm not associated with anybody, no camps, no denominations. So if you have not checked out these books, you can go to Amazon.com or you can get them on BarnesandNoble.com, and you can probably actually get them in any bookstore. If you go in, if they're not available on the shelf, which most times they're not, you can have them order them for you. I do have distribution through Baker and Taylor and Ingram. So yeah, check out those two books if you don't already have them. And if you have them already, leave a review. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the first Maccabees verse. Then they fasted that day and put on sackcloth and cast ashes upon their heads and rent their clothes and laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. First Maccabees 3:47 through 48. If you have not watched parts 1, 2, and 3 yet, please do so. You need to have the foundation before you move through part 4. Part 1, I dealt with the Hamites. Part 2, I dealt with the Shemites. And in part 3, I dealt with the lineage of Japheth. So if you have not watched those videos yet and got the foundation, stop this video and go watch those and then come back to this video. But if you have and you're ready to proceed, today we're going to get into some deep stuff. We're going to talk about the truth. Now, what I found is a lot of people say that they are looking for the truth, or they want the truth, or they want to operate in the truth. But the truth is, many people don't. They have their denominations, they have their doctrines, they have their creeds and codes and all this other stuff that they've signed and adhered to. And so what they do is they defend that, not because it's the truth, but because it's what they have decided to adhere to. And this is one of the reasons I don't associate myself with any of the camps. This is the reason I do not toss myself in with the moderates or whatever else people want to label us as. I don't refer to myself as a Black Hebrew Israelite. I refer to myself as an Israelite if anybody asks me. But other than that, I don't associate with any of the known Israelite groups. And the reason for that is with groups often comes doctrine. And when you have a group of people who agree to a set doctrine, it's hard to maneuver and shift as new information becomes available. And one thing about my ministry, I've always been clear that if new information comes in and it contradicts something I already believe, I will make sure to correct that belief and let you know that, hey, I used to believe this and now I believe this. I've been very clear about that in regards to Israel. I used to believe Israel was the people over there now that say they are Israel. And through a lot of research, most of which has been prompted by Teo, I changed that point of view. And so now I openly teach and preach that Israel is black. And so that got me kicked out of the circles that I was in. For those of you who have been following me for a long time, you know that back in early 2000, mid 2000s, 2009, 2010, probably through 2012-ish, I was in with the conservative white fringe Christian circles, and I used to be on a lot of their podcasts and radio shows. I had a show on Freedomizer Radio, which is a conservative prepper slash SHTF group. So they had a large following. Let's see. I've been on a lot of stuff. You guys can go back and check all that old stuff out. But the point is, when I started speaking the truth, it got me kicked out of those circles. And I was warned before I got kicked out of the circle. Now, I had been in on a few behind the scenes meetings with these guys where they would Skype each other and get a bunch of people on Skype, and they would figure out who's in, who's out, who's causing waves, who they should pay attention to, that sort of thing. And so it was kind of known that there was an inner circle, and it was really nothing anybody could do about it. So anyway, before I started teaching this, when I first started hinting that I was going to talk about this, I was told to leave it alone. I was told I shouldn't teach on that. I was told I would alienate my fan base. I was told that it's divisive. I was told all kind of stuff. And so, of course, they did kick me out of the inner circle. And so now I don't deal with any of those guys anymore. I had already broke off a lot of dealings with some of them anyway. But the point is, I'm about truth. And so what you're about to see here today, I know I've been rambling on, but what you're about to see here today is truth. Now, I challenge any black urban apologist, any black person that sits under Eurocentric Christianity, any black pastor who attended a seminary, any black pastor who has never researched Israelites, Judah specifically, and the transatlantic slave trade. Watch this teaching all the way through to the end, and then tell me where I'm lying. And if I'm not lying, ask yourself why you weren't taught this in seminary. Ask yourself why you weren't taught this in college or high school or elementary school or any history class you've ever been in. Ask yourself why it is we, black people, pay European institutions, colleges, seminaries to lie to us. And that's all I want you to do is just ask those questions if this is true. Now, if none of this is true, it doesn't matter. But if this is true, you have to ask those questions. Why do we pay those people to lie to us? Why do we pay those people to teach us our own history, but incomplete history? What I've heard it said before, a lie by omission is still a lie. Well, you're about to see a lot of omission today. So if you don't want your paradigm changed, if you don't want your truth changed, your reality changed, you should stop this video right here, right now. But if not, let's proceed. So most recently, we had the Jersey City shooting. Now, this is from USA Today. And before I get started, just know that the links to everything I'm about to show you, the links are in the, let me back up. I'm going to do a page on my website on blackhistoryinthebible.com with all the reference links in here, because there's a lot of reference links. And I'm going to post the link to that page in the description on YouTube. So click the description. There will be a link to the page on blackhistoryinthebible.com, and you'll get all of these references. So that way I don't have to keep saying the references are in the description. All right. So the most recent thing to happen, Jersey City shooting. Who are the Black Hebrew Israelites? Now, this is two screenshots put together because there's a huge picture in between the title and the body of the text that I wanted to point out. So I cut out that picture. But you see this on USA Today. And I think this is an interesting headline because they immediately associated this shooting with the Black Hebrew Israelites, knowing that most people stop reading at the title. They don't go through and read the text. But if you do go down and read the text, you will see that right here in the first paragraph, when it talks about the suspects, it says they had expressed interest in the Black Hebrew Israelite group. They expressed interest. They weren't Hebrew Israelites. They didn't belong to any Black Hebrew Israelite congregation or camp. They expressed an interest. And as you read down again and you keep going down, let me see here. Let me make sure that here he is right here. Here we are. Both shooters had expressed interest in the Black Hebrew Israelites. Again, a group with factions that have been designated as hate groups. So this right here tells us that they weren't Israelites. But if we continue reading, it says, but appeared to have acted alone. in what was being investigated as a domestic terrorism incident with a hate crime bent. Now, notice how fast they labeled this as domestic terrorism and a hate crime. And yet, when we see white mass shooters, such as Dylan Roof, shoot up a black church, and he has white supremacist affiliations and connections and symbology and all this stuff on his computer, they have to investigate for a month to see if there's any race-based motive or any connection to a hate group. And yet the day this happened, because they were black and had an interest in the Black Hebrew Israelites, we see the headline, "Who are the Black Hebrew Israelites associated with this shooting?" Even though they only expressed an interest and weren't actually Hebrew Israelites. Now, just understand that there is a difference in how news is handled. And we're going to come back to this shortly. Now, I do want to give this disclaimer before I continue. A lot of this stuff will seem like random information. You'll be saying, what does this have to do with anything? But I'm going to tie it all together as we proceed through this study. I'm going to tie everything together, so there's not going to be anything left hanging that you don't see why, oh, he put that there. I see why he said that. So just hang in there, even though if it seems random at times. So before this, what was going on before this shooting that happened? We ended up in a situation where we had two groups of people identifying as Israelites or Jews, if you want to use that term. Now, these are the brothers from IUIC. I do not endorse or adhere to any of their doctrine because, again, I'm not associated with any camps. I just want to give them credit because I Googled Black Hebrew Israelites and their picture was one of the first ones to come up, and I used it. So this is a picture from IUIC. Now, the other group are the European Jews. They are claiming to be Israel. So which group is correct? And so when I started looking into this, I thought it was interesting because the first thing you visually see are people of two different skin colors, races, ethnicities. And you ask yourself, wait a minute, if one group is right, then the other group is 100% most definitely wrong. That was just something I looked at and said, okay, that would be a logical conclusion. So all we have to do is figure out which group is right. And then by default, we should know which other group is lying. So yeah, the European Jews and the Israelites. So before we got these people who were claiming to be Israel, before we got to this point where we are in history right now, earlier this year, 2019, we had Ghana announce the year of return. Now, I thought it was interesting that Ghana announced the year of return because some people were talking about the 400 years, the end of the 400 years of the curse on Israel in association with African-American slavery or Black American slavery, whatever you want to identify as. And we started talking about this year of return. Ghana doing it makes it interesting. And again, like I said, some stuff may seem random, but I'm going to tie it in. So just keep in mind the year of return, Ghana 2019. Now, one of the things that has been pointed out by people who study prophecy is that in Jeremiah 29, it talks about Israel being returned to the place where they were taken from. Jeremiah 29:14. He says, "And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity, and I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord. And I will bring you again into the place whence I caused you to be carried away captive." And so some people associate this with African Americans or Black Americans or whatever you want to call us, whatever terminology you want to use. I'm not going to get caught up on the semantics of it. Us being returned to Africa where we were carried away from. And so some look at this Ghana return of 2019 as a fulfillment or the beginning of the fulfillment of the Jeremiah 29:14 prophecy. Whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. Either it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. But before Ghana invited us back home, in 2000, well, I guess 1999 was when this was done. But in 2000, PBS posted this. Now I left the website address up here. PBS posted this, but the earliest one I saw was from 1999. So they investigated the Lemba. And Nova put out a documentary special on the Limba, which I thought was interesting. And the first time I heard of the Limba, it blew my mind. It was during the early parts of my research. So I do want to read this portion of the text right here for those of you who are not familiar with the Limba. In an interview with Nova, team member Dr. David Goldstein commented on the team's findings. The first striking thing about the Y chromosomes of the Limba is that you find this particular chromosomal type, Cohen model haplotype, that is characteristic of the Jewish priesthood in a frequency that is similar to what you see in major Jewish populations. Something just under 1 out of every 10 Limba that we looked at had this particular Y chromosomal type that appears to be a signature of Jewish ancestry. Perhaps even more striking is the fact that this Cohen genetic signature is strongly associated with a particular clan in the Limba. Most of the Cohen model types that we observe are carried by individuals of the Buba clan, which in Limba oral tradition had a relationship or leadership role in bringing the Limba out of Israel. Now, the Limba are a black tribe that lives in Africa, in Zimbabwe and the surrounding areas. And they have DNA proof that they are Israelites, but more specifically linked to the tribe of Levi. So if you have not studied the Limba, it's an interesting study to look into. And we're going to come back to the Limba because we got to tie some stuff together. So before this Limba study came out in 99, 2000, that proved that there were black people in Africa that had genetic DNA proof that they were Israelites, Cambridge University Press in 1985 released a book. Now, I'm not going to talk about the book right here because the book addresses some issues that occur prior to 1985. But I do want to point out that the book was published in 1985, just before this Limba study. And what we're going to see in that study is going to add a lot of credibility to some stuff down the line. But what I am going to do is talk about Cambridge University Press. And this is important because when you run across UA and other apologists or people who are adhering to Eurocentric Christianity and not the truth, they will tell you that they've debunked sources, right? And not one of them will tell you that they've debunked Cambridge University Press. Now, just listen to their credentials. Cambridge University Press is the publishing division of the University of Cambridge, one of the world's leading research institutions and winner of 81 Nobel Prizes. Cambridge University Press is committed by its charter to disseminate knowledge as widely as possible across the globe. It publishes over 2,500 books a year for distribution in more than 200 countries. Cambridge Journals publishes over 250 peer-reviewed academic journals across a wide range of subject areas in print and online. Many of these journals are leading academic publications in their fields and together form one of the most valuable and comprehensive bodies of research available today. And then it has their information, cambridge.org. So Cambridge University Press has credentials. This is important because Cambridge University Press is going to tie together some stuff. But before 1985, when Cambridge University Press published this book we're going to talk about later, you have Haile Selassie in 1974. Now, I just took a screenshot of the Google search and what it shows you. Now, Haile Selassie is an interesting political figure. On the right, here's what it says. Haile Selassie I was crown prince and regent of the Ethiopian Empire from 1916 to 1928, and then king and regent from 1928 to 1930, and finally emperor from 1930 to 1974. He is a defining figure in modern Ethiopian history. Why is he important? He's important because he was the last emperor or king of the Solomonic dynasty. Now you'll see on there, if you're watching the video, you see my results that come up when you search for Solomonic dynasty on the left. Just ignore those, as it says, only visible to me. But the Solomonic dynasty is interesting because I'll read this. The Solomonic dynasty, also known as the House of Solomon, is the former ruling imperial house of the Ethiopian Empire. The dynasty's members claim lineal descent from the biblical king of Solomon and the queen of Sheba. So if you ever heard the story of the Queen of Sheba, the rest of the story is that Solomon and Sheba had a son named Menelik the First, and he was the first Solomonic ruler of Ethiopia. And the Solomon dynasty maintained the throne and rule over Ethiopia up until 1974, when Haile Selassie was deposed. So this is huge in history because there is a black leader of an African country claiming direct descent from Solomon. Solomon is the son of David, and David is the tribe of Judah, meaning that someone from the tribe of Judah has ruled in Ethiopia since Menelik the First, who would have been born about roughly 9 months after the Queen of Sheba met King Solomon. So are you following where I'm going with this right now? We have a visual link, somebody who lived within the lifetime of some people who are still alive right now. He's black and he claims to be descended directly from Solomon, tribe of Judah. So we're going to continue. We're going to come back to Haile Selassie. We're going to come back to the Solomonic dynasty. So before 1974, when this black Ethiopian emperor who claimed to be descended from Solomon was deposed, we had Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger. Now, for those of you who've heard the name and don't really know who Henry Kissinger is, I took 2 screenshots, one from Wikipedia, one from a basic Google search. I'll read the Wikipedia entry first. Henry Alfred Kissinger is German. Born Heinz Alfred Kissinger, is an American politician, diplomat, and geopolitical consultant who served as United States Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under the presidential administrations of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. A Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany with his family in 1938, he became National Security Advisor in 1969 and U.S. Secretary of State in 1973. For his actions negotiating a ceasefire in Vietnam, Kissinger received the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize under controversial circumstances, with 2 members of the committee resigning in protest. Kissinger later sought unsuccessfully to return the prize after the ceasefire failed. So, notice there, he's a Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany with his family in 1938. That's important. If you read below, it basically says the same thing. So, Henry Kissinger is a German-born Jew who fled Nazi Germany. This is important. He is one of the people that we are talking about. Now, here's what he wrote to the president. In 1969, German-born Jew wrote this. Biafra, Colonel Ojukwu, 35, British-trained, erstwhile playboy, presides over the popular support and military morale of a people convinced that defeat means extinction. The Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa, gifted, aggressive, westernized, at best envied and resented, but mostly despised by the mass of their neighbors in the Federation. They have fought well by African standards against heavy odds. Their cynical public relations use of the starvation has been brilliant. That's Henry Kissinger, Tuesday, January 28, 1968, memorandum to the president. That is on the Library of Congress website, and I have a link directly to the Library of Congress website. Now, notice what he said. The Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa. Why would a German-born Jew that fled Nazi Germany say that the Igbos, who are African, they are black people, he calls them the wandering Jews of West Africa? Just let that sink in for a minute, and we'll come back to that. Now, before 1969, we had the Zondervan Bible Dictionary published in 1963. And I mentioned this when we talked about Ham in part 1. So right here it says, in the Zondervan Dictionary published in 1963, Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood, he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and Canaanites. His indecency when his father lay drunken brought a curse upon Canaan. So this is what it says in their entry. The progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, But it ties back into what I was saying earlier on part one, when I talked about the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites being black people. They believe this is a European publication. They believe that these are black people. This is going to become more important down the line as we get into some more of the history. But the most important part right now is not the Negroes. The Negroes are not from Ham. Now, going back to what Kissinger said, the Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa. So if they are wandering Jews, that means they are not from Ham. They are from Shem, because the Israelites or the Jews come from the line of Shem. So we're going to see consistency when you are playing around with the truth. There's consistency. When somebody's lying to you, the lies become inconsistent. So before 1963, we had COINTELPRO. And I put the parenthesis in the wrong place right there, not paying attention. But 1956 to 1971, you have COINTELPRO. Now, COINTELPRO says syllabic abbreviation derived from Counterintelligence Program. It was run from 1956 to 1971. This is super important because we're about to tie some stuff together right here. The FBI sets goals for COINTELPRO. So this is J. Edgar Hoover. The goals: for maximum effectiveness of the counterintelligence program and to prevent wasted effort, long-range goals are being set. Number 1, prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. In unity there is strength, a truism that is no less valid for all its triteness. An effective coalition of black nationalist groups might be the first step towards a real Mau Mau, Black Revolutionary Army in America, the beginning of a true black revolution. Number 2, prevent the rise of a Messiah. I'm going to say that again. Prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black national movement. Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. So again, prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black national movement. Number 3, prevent violence on the part of black nationalist groups. This is of primary importance and is, of course, a goal of our investigative activity. It should also be a goal of the counterintelligence program to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence. This is why I said last time, don't go out doing any violence. Don't go out acting on any of the stuff you may have heard from the camps or any of these other extremist groups. Don't go out doing that sort of stuff, because the FBI has programs in place to target and, as you see, neutralize, whatever that means, prison, death, whatever, people who are trying to be violent. So don't go out doing that. Now, number 4, prevent militant black national groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to 3 separate segments of the community. This is important. So now you'll understand. Well, I'm going to get ahead of myself, but the goal of discrediting black nationalists must be handled tactically in 3 ways. You must discredit those groups and individuals to, first, the responsible Negro community. Second, they must be discredited to the white community, both the responsible community and to the liberals who have vestiges of sympathy for militant black nationalists, simply because they are Negroes. Third, these groups must be discredited in the eyes of the Negro radicals, the followers of the movement. This last area requires entirely different tactics from the first 2. Publicity about violent tendencies and radical statements merely enhances black nationalists to the last group. It adds respectability in a different way. 5, a final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black organizations, especially among the youth. Specific tactics to prevent these groups from converting young people must be developed. So now when you see the headline, Jersey City shooting, who are the black Hebrew Israelites? All you have to do is go back to the COINTELPRO goals and see what's going on here. Now, COINTELPRO was supposedly shut down in 1971, but as we see, the same tactics are still being used in the media. the Black Hebrew Israelites are looked at like a militant group. So what do they want to do? They want to discredit this group, and they want to show them as violent, so that the responsible or educated or what was the word they used? The responsible Negro community will see them as violent hate group. And if you're responsible and you have good credit and you have money coming in and you have a nice job, you don't want to be associated with that, because that jeopardizes that. But you also have to discredit them to the liberals in the white community. The white community doesn't want anything to do with shooting up the Jewish community. And then you have to discredit them in the eyes of the radicals. So now that they're being looked at, so what happens is you have this shooting, and then immediately after that, the task force gets rolled out. And then immediately after that, Trump starts talking about declaring Jew as an ethnicity, which means this is automatically a hate crime. So you see that there is an agenda moving forward that is rooted in COINTELPRO. But remember, number 2 on the list, prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify. This is going to be important because we're going to come back to preventing the rise of the Messiah. Now, before the COINTELPRO op, we had the British Mandate for Palestine. So COINTELPRO is going to go from 1956 to 1971. So we have the British Mandate for Palestine. Excuse me. This is going to be 1948, the British Mandate for Palestine. Now, I'm going to read starting at the second paragraph. It was approved by the League of Nations. The British were given a dual mandate, that is, on behalf of Palestine's inhabitants on the one hand, and on behalf of international society on the other. The Balfour Declaration was incorporated into the preamble and the second article of the Mandate for Palestine. Britain thus also had a dual obligation towards both Arabs and Jews. While the mandate included the main parts of the Balfour Declaration, such as the proclamation of support for a Jewish national home, under the mandate's terms, Britain had an obligation to conduct its policy in Palestine in accordance with the needs of both the Jews and Arabs. This included creating political, administrative, and economic conditions that would facilitate the independent rule of the communities under British control. These objectives were an integral contradiction in the mandate. The British determined the borders of Palestine according to the other agreements they had made with their allies. For example, they transferred the eastern bank of the Jordan River to the control of Abdullah ibn Hussein of the Hashemite dynasty and appointed him king of Jordan in recognition of his support during the war. All right, so basically, long story short, the British determined the borders in Palestine and Israel, which is the reason we do not have peace in the Middle East right now. They were under obligation to do this because of the Balfour Declaration. We're going to come back to the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration is going to be very interesting because a name is going to come up that some of you are familiar with, some of you are not familiar with. Now, the State of Israel proclaimed on May 14th, 1948, in Tel Aviv, Jewish Agency Chairman David Ben-Gurion proclaims the State of Israel, establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years. Ben-Gurion became Israel's first premier. So this is in 1948. Israel, or the people who call themselves Israel, now have land as of 1948. And this is establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years. We're going to come back to them getting the land and what Britain had to do. How did Britain come into Palestine land and they took over for the Ottoman Empire? We'll touch briefly on some of that as we come back through, but this is important. 1948, they get the land. Now, if some of you watched part 3, I pointed out that once they got that land and they started living there, they weren't built for that land. And so they have the second highest melanoma rate there. So living in that land is literally killing them. And then on top of that, there's the constant threat of war and death, because they are not supposed to be on that land. And we'll talk about that. For those of you who are still adhering to Eurocentric Christianity, and I know you guys are probably thinking, how is this connecting? I told you I'm going to get to it. Now, before 1948, in 1920, we had a song, Kumbaya, that basically took off and is popular. Everybody knows the song Kumbaya. Most people have sang it or heard it. Now, this is a screenshot from my website. I did a full study on Kumbaya. What I find interesting is that when you dig into it, you see the early roots. It says, according to the history, the song was first recorded in the early 20s. However, it is believed to have originated with Southern slaves in the Gullah language. Gullah is a language that was spoken by slaves that inhabited North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So what were slaves doing singing Kumbaya? And if you ask many people what Kumbaya means, they will tell you it means come by here. However, when you look up the words in the Strong's Dictionary, kum means stand up, arise, translated as come to some people, come Father God, or arise Father God. We sing come by here, my Lord, kumbaya. That's what some people believe it means, come by here, my Lord. So Ba doesn't have a meaning alone in Hebrew, but may be an abbreviation for Abba, which means father. That is unconfirmed. But Yah, Strong's Dictionary number 3050, the word is translated as Lord in scripture when referring to the God of Israel. So Kumbaya, arise, Father God, or come by here, my Lord. So it says loosely translated, the lyrics seem to mean arise, Father God, or stand up, Father God, not come by here. So why would the slaves be singing this? Why would the slaves be calling out to Yah? Just let that marinate for a moment if you have never asked a question about the song Kumbaya. Why would black slaves be calling out to Yah, the God of Israel, to save them from slavery? That is why. Now, the song was sang in Gullah. Gullah is also a Hebrew word. Strong's 1543 means basin, bowl, or spring. Basically something you mix things into. So Gullah is the language. Kumbaya is the song, both of which have links to Hebrew. Now, I'm going to prove to you that Gullah has a link to Hebrew. In the dictionary, this is just a screenshot of Google. I just Googled the word Gullah. You can do it yourself if you want. It says a member of a black people living on the coast of South Carolina and nearby islands. The Creole language of Gullah, having an English base with elements from the various West African languages. So let me read that again before I continue. The Creole language of the Gullah, having an English base with the elements from various West African languages. Who was in West Africa? According to Henry Kissinger in 1969, the Igbo, the wandering Jews of West Africa. So if there's Jews in West Africa and Gullah has elements of West Africans, those Jews are probably speaking Hebrew. My assumption, they probably speak Hebrew. They're in West Africa. Gullah is a Hebrew word that comes from, well, the language comes from elements of West Africa, and the word itself is Hebrew. And then they have a song in the Hebrew. So hopefully you're starting to see the connections. I told you we'd come back to the Henry Kissinger. He said the Igbo are the wandering Jews of West Africa. So we have a connection to Jews in Africa. We have a connection to Hebrew being spoken by slaves who are connected to Africa, singing songs in Hebrew in a language that is connected to Africa. But before the 1920s, before that song was recorded in 1920, in 1917, you have the Balfour Declaration. Told you we'd come back to it. The Balfour Declaration. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government, it's talking about England, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. This is what was being referred to when they said the Balfour Declaration obligated them to make a Jewish home in Palestine. And so they divided the land. We're going to come back to that. The English divided the land. The English are Europeans. Who did I say the Europeans were in part 3? The descendants of Japheth, the Gentiles. So again, if you haven't watched part 3, go back and watch part 3. They are the Gentiles. And we talked about briefly in Joel 3. Who divided the land? Who parted the land? Who parted his land according to the Bible? The Gentiles parted the land. And we see here in the Balfour Agreement, they obligated themselves to part the land. We'll come back to it. And this is a picture of, I believe it's William Balfour. What's his name? He's the guy who signed the Declaration. That's his signature there at the bottom. So before the Balfour Declaration in 1917, as you notice, I'm working my way backwards through history because sometimes it's easier to work your way backwards than to start at a point of origin and try to figure out where everything went. It's easier to figure out what was going on around the time. So before 1917, in 1910, there was a book published called The Negro in the New World. Now, the reason I'm showing you this page like this, I'm going to show a cut to a larger blow up of the page on the right, page 27. But in 1910, this is going to tie in with part 2, the Shemites. If you have not yet read or watched the Shemite video in part 2, go watch it before you watch this. So in 1910, The Negro in the New World was published. Now I'm going to start reading right here. It says the Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair and to have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians. I'm going to stop right there. The Elamites. I mentioned those are descendants of Shem. Elam was a descendant of Shem, the son of Shem. Appear to have been a Negroid people and transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians. We'll come back. There's a link to all of this right here. You can read through all of it, but I'm going to skip down. Actually, you know what? Let me finish reading this. There is curliness of the hair together with a Negro eye and full lips in the portraiture of Assyria, which conveys the idea of an evident Negro element in Babylonia, quite probably the very ancient Negro invasion of the Mediterranean Europe, of which the skeletons of the Alps and Maritimes are vestiges, came from Syria and Asia Minor on its way to Central and Western Europe. So that's the first part. The Elamites appear to have passed down Negroid features to the Jews and Syrians. Now, if the Elamites are Shemites and they have Negroid features, that takes us back to 1963, the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Ham, the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes. Here again, we see the Negroes linked to Shem. Syrians, the Assyrians. The Jews, those are Shemites. The Elamites, those are Shemites. And what did Henry Kissinger say in 1969? The Ebos are the wandering Jews. The Ebos would be Shemites. And that is coming from Henry Kissinger, who was a German-born Jew that fled Nazi Germany. He's telling you the Ebos are Shemites. This right here in 1910 is telling you the Elamites, who are Shemites, appear to have been Negroes. If you go down here to the bottom, note number 1, the Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain shows itself occasionally in the curly hair, the long eye, and the proportions of the skull. The Jewish hybrids with the Negro in where? Jamaica and Guyana reproduce most strikingly the Assyrian type. So when you get to Jamaica and you see the Rastafarians and they fly the Rastafarian flag with the tribe of Judah, the lion of the tribe of Judah on the flag, just know that that links directly to Ethiopia, which links directly to Haile Selassie, who was the last ruling Solomonic emperor. So all this stuff is connected, but notice that we keep coming back to black every time we start talking about Jewish. Now, I didn't write any of this. This was written in 1910 by a European explorer. The link is in the link is going to be on the page, but he is an English writer. He is a Caucasian English writer, and you'll see the link when you get there. But again, once again, Negroes are linked to the line of Shem. Now, these are the Elamites. What do you say there? The Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair. Here we go. These are the Elamites. It says, and to have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians. Here are the Assyrians right here. I showed you before the Assyrians. We see, look at the bottom of the hair, similar. See the hair, similar. These are the Elamites, these are the Assyrians. And we talked about the Shemites, the Judean captives. If you haven't seen that, go back to part 2 and watch it. It'll show the Judean captives who also look like Negroes. So again, there's consistency in the truth. And as I pointed out, Asher, the name Asher means black. And it has here an Israelite, even though Asher was a Shemite, more correctly, not an Israelite, but the name means black. Now, before this, Haaretz, this is a Jewish publication. Now, just let me go back real quick. This was 1910. So Haaretz, this is going to bring us to 1901. Haaretz, first ever photos of Yemen Jews stun the Jewish world. Now, this was published in May 4th, 2017. Excuse me. The reason this was published in 2017 is because the photographer who took these pictures, Herman Burchard, did not want to release these photos in 1901. He didn't think the world was ready to see these photos. These photos were taken in Yemen, Sena, Yemen. These are Yemen's Jews. They are clearly not Caucasians. These are Yemen's Jews taken in 1901. He did not release that because he didn't think the world was ready to see dark-skinned Jews, because the world had been told that the Jews look like Europeans or Caucasians. That was what was being presented to the world. Now we're going to come back to the Limba. The Limba, when you listen to their story, say that their path crossed through Sena, and it shows their migration from Israel down into here, down into Zimbabwe and these other countries over in here, all into South Africa. Notice that the Limba's migration passes through Yemen. There is a city called Sena in Yemen, sometimes spelled Sena, Sanaa. Sana'a is an abandoned ancient town in Yemen, located in the remote eastern Hadramaut Valley. So if you listen to the Yembo, who are confirmed, DNA confirmed to be descendants of the tribe of Levi, their path crosses through Sena, Yemen. And in Sena, Yemen, we find pictures of Jews that look like this. And again, every time we keep digging, we keep coming back to dark or black or African Jews or Israelites. But before 1901, we had the formation of the Zionist Federation. Now, remember, in the Balfour Agreement, or the Balfour Declaration, at the bottom, he said, send this information forwarded to the Zionist Federation. So in 1899, the Zionist Federation was established. So right here it says this was established. There's a link. You can go to zionist.org.uk and read up on the Zionist Federation. So I just wanted to point that out when they were established in 1899. But before 1899, before they established the Zionist Federation, this is where it gets interesting. Vocab Malone and the Urban Apologists have this lie that they've been pushing, and they went on the Hank Hanegraaff or Hanegraaff, how you pronounce his name, the Answer Man show, the Bible Answer Man, who has a large European audience. And he went on there talking about the black Hebrew Israelites. And of course, they would invite a non-black person on to talk about black people. And of course, he pushes misinformation. Now, this is why I personally don't believe that we should pay people who aren't us to teach us about us. I personally don't think we should allow people who aren't us to teach our children our history or about us. Now, I want to point out what Hank said, and I'm going to point out what Vocab Malone said. Hank says lots of people are listening in are going to say, what in the world is a black Hebrew Israelite? Give us some kind of idea about the origins of this movement. It is obviously multifaceted, not monolithic, but share about some of the leaders like Frank Cherry and William S. Crowdy, along with how all this got started. Now, notice what Hank says. Frank Cherry and William S. Crowdy. Vocab's response is, back in 1896, the first known for certain documented case of someone who would be called an African American saying that they're actually an Israelite was Crowdy. This is what he says. In 1896, the first known for certain documented case of someone who would be called an African American saying that they are actually an Israelite was Crowdy. Now, understand something. When we talk about spiritual warfare manifests itself into the physical realm. So a lot of these apologists who claim that they're defending the faith, they aren't defending the faith. What they're doing is they're being used as pawns by the enemy, because the truth is always inserted into the lie in order to get people to believe the lie more effectively. So when he says 1896 is the first known for certain documented case, he's telling you can stop right there, because this is where this thing begins. It begins in 1896. No need to look any further. This is what he's telling you subliminally. And so a lot of people stop right there. Oh, well, Vocab said 1896. I heard this guy on the radio say 1896 was the first documented case. And some people believe that. So let's talk about Crowdy real quick. Now, Vocab was telling the truth about Crowdy being an Israelite. But was he telling the truth about this being the first case? It says William Saunders Crowdy was an American soldier, preacher, entrepreneur, theologian, and pastor. As one of the earliest Hebrew Israelites in the United States, he established the Church of God and Saints of Christ in 1896 after he claimed to have had visions telling him that blacks were the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So Vocab is right. He established this church in 1896. So for those of you who follow Vocab, this is your chance to get off of this train right now. For those of you who follow the UA community and believe the stuff that they say, this is your chance to get off of this train right now. Because I assure you, Vocab was 100% wrong. I assure you that the UA community is 100% wrong when they tell you that 1896 was the first established case. Now, before that, this is the reason I pointed out Hank's words. Hank said, but share about some of the leaders like Frank Cherry and William S. Crowdy. Now, Frank called out the name Frank Cherry to Vocab, and Vocab's response was 1896, and he referenced Crowdy. However, when you look up Frank Cherry, the name that Hank mentioned, if you go down to here, he established the Church of the Living God, the pillar ground of truth for all nations in 1886. This is 10 years before Vocab says, right? But look at Frank Cherry. Was the founder and leader of the first black Hebrew, or I guess it's supposed to be one of the first black Hebrew Israelite churches in the United States. This is from Wikipedia, so there's spelling errors sometimes, but there are references. He was the founder of one of the first black Hebrew Israelites church in the United States. His was in 1886, but what did Vocab say? 1896 was the first. Even though Hank gave him the name Frank Cherry, who founded his church 10 years before William Crowdy, Vocab's response was that Crowdy was the first. So we hear an inconsistency in Vocab's belief system. So either he had not been familiar with Frank Cherry, and to the best of his knowledge, Crowdy was the earliest in 1896, but he said it as a matter of fact, as if he knew that to be true, which it was not a matter of fact, when in the same question he was given a name who predates Crowdy by 10 years. So I just want you guys to see the inconsistency when you're dealing with some of these people who aren't us, who are going on these shows and trying to teach people about us and about what we believe. We cannot trust them to be factual, because they have no dog in the fight to be factual. Well, they kind of do, but they don't have any reason or obligation to be factual about our history. They can go on a show like that with a white audience and be completely careless because it doesn't affect them. It makes them look better if they seem like they know what they're talking about. Now, had anybody fact checked Vocab Malone on that show, they could have proved that he was lying. But now he's gone in front of a large white audience and lied to them and told them that 1896 was the earliest date, when all he had to do was use Google and he could have found that 1886 was actually earlier than that. But before that, in 1890, this is the proto-history of the Igbo Jewish identity, 1890 to 1970. Characterized local features of some societies as generalization on a whole community by assuming that they were a branch of the Hebrews. The most influential work among the Igbos of Nigeria, 1921, and the Niger Igbos, in 1938 were written by G.T. Basden, an Anglican missionary who served in the area for more than 35 years. Basden's writings institutionalized knowledge about Igbo culture and were accepted by many Igbo as the main documents define the essence of their ethnic group. We'll keep going. Basden noticed that there are certain customs which rather point to Levitic influence at a more or less remote period. This is suggested in the underlying ideas concerning sacrifice and in the practice of circumcision. The language also bears several interesting parallels with the Hebrew idiom. He also argued that the affinity between native law and the Mosaic system is remarkable, and asserted that among the Igbo, a distinct recognition existed of a supreme being and of his enemy, the devil. This view of Igbo as descendants of the lost tribes of Israel gained prominence among Igbo clergy, who communicated the insight in church and was soon appropriated by the Igbo. So here we go. In 1890, the Igbo are being talked about as Jews, the proto-history of Igbo Jewish identity. And who did Henry Kissinger say they were in 1969? The wandering Jews of South Africa or West Africa. The wandering Jews of West Africa. And here again, we see the Igbos linked to the Jews in 1890. But before that, before 1890, in 1879, we're coming back to Cambridge University Press. Remember, I told you we're going to tie all this together. Cambridge University Press in 1985 published a book that dealt with events that happened in 1879. And this, again, goes back to what Vocab Malone said. The first known case is 1896. That was out of his mouth. And yet Cambridge University, he has not called them to tell them to update their information because they got it wrong. And there's a reason the UA community and the Eurocentric Christian community won't call and tell Cambridge University Press to update their information, is because the UA community and the Eurocentric Christian community are intentionally feeding misinformation into the black community about who we are, and in misinformation to the world about who Israel is. So in 1879, this is what he said, what the book says. Blacks and Jews, the same claim. It says, in the first months of 1879, there was a massive migration of some 500 blacks to the northern territories of the United States, mainly Kansas and Oklahoma. This exodus was of despairing blacks seeking a refuge, a place where their political rights would mean something, where they would be free from economic exploitation, and above all, from the dangerous activities of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the members of this exodus was Benjamin Pap Singleton, an elderly and colorful man who led a group of 300 blacks to Cherokee County in Kansas. There they founded a colony, Singleton's colony, Singleton calling himself the Moses of the Exodus of colored people. From 1900 onward, North and South Carolina were overrun by black preachers who were propagating a doctrine according to which the lost tribe of the house of Israel was none other than the Negroes. Although this might first seem an odd claim, it can be seen as reflecting the beliefs that some black slaves had held during their captivity when they were interrogated on their origins, their destiny. I'm going to stop right there for just a second. Black slaves held the belief that they were Israelites. Negroes. Again, the word Negroes comes up. What did Zondervan say in 1963? The Negroes are not from Ham. They understood who we were even back then, all the way back in 1879 into slavery. So let me continue reading. A historical example supports this hypothesis. What hypothesis? This hypothesis that some slaves were the house of Israel. From the Lost Tribes, it says a historical example supports this hypothesis. A slave uprising took place in Richmond, Virginia at the beginning of the 19th century. Now, understand how the centuries work for those of you who are not familiar. The 19th century starts at the 1800s. The 20th century starts at the 1900s. That's why it's 2019 and we're considered in the 21st century. So now, understand the context. A slave uprising took place in Richmond, Virginia at the beginning of the 19th century, which was led by a slave called Gabriel Prosser, an outstanding personality who had acquired some knowledge of the Bible. He frequently referred to it in order to convince his brothers that they were the descendants of Israelites and that God would free them from slavery as he had their ancestors. He identified himself with Samson, his favorite Bible character. Like Samson, he wore his hair long as a sign given by God of the alliance made with his, and then it cuts off. Now, again, didn't vocab say 1896 was the first? And yet Cambridge University Press gives us an example from 1879 and then tell us there's a historical example to support the slavery hypothesis, and tells us at the beginning, the early part of the 19th century, which is the 1800s, early 1800s, that there was a slave that identified himself as and his followers as descendants of the Israelites. So let's go to page 231 of the same publication. It is well known that 1500 years before Islam, Judaism was present in Africa. Travelers' tales and stories of journeys across North Africa and the Sahara and the Sudan provide considerable evidence of the existence of Jewish communities on the African continent. We know that from the time of St. Jerome, 340 to 420 AD, a chain of Jewish commercial towns stretched almost uninterrupted from Mauritania to India. St. Augustine learned Hebrew in Tanzim, where there was a Judeo-Syrian colony which came from Cyrenaica. These groups went as far as Akkar on the southern Sahara, and according to the Chronicles of the Sudan, the dynasty of the kings of Ghana originated in this group. What originated in that group? The dynasty of the kings of Ghana originated in this Judeo-Syrian group. Jewish contacts and influence with Black Africa were also noted by the Arab geographers Ibn Khordadbeh, I'm terrible with foreign names, and El-Bikri, who stated that the roots of the trans-Saharan trade in which Jewish caravans and interpreters were involved culminated in Ghana. And then it cuts off. What did we say in the beginning? Ghana, 2019, year of the return. They invited us back. We said Jeremiah 29:14. Some people believe it's the fulfilling of the prophecy. So Ghana, who was linked to Jews, are calling us, who are descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, back home. We're going to tie all this up again. We're going to keep tying all this together. So Ghana's year of return is tied to the fact that Ghana is linked to the Israelites. We saw that just a few pages before, slaves in America are linked to the Israelites. But let's go to page 235 of the same book. In southern Nigeria, here we go with the Nigerians, the natives call Black Jews the strange people on the Imo Yo Kwaim. They are called the B'nai Ephraim, the sons of Ephraim. They claim that their ancestors came from Morocco, and this is supported by Godbey, who noted that their language is a mixture of Maghrebian Arab, ancient Hebrew, and local patois. For example, Abu, meaning father, became Yaba. For mother is close to the Hebrew word. These Imo Ya Kwaim Jews live in the Ondo district and have a copy of the Torah. The study of customs and rites and the analysis of the semantics of these African tribes have led many of their observers to propose some hypotheses and even draw some conclusions. Dr. Alan H. Godbey reached the following conclusion. These factors have a very specific significance if we consider the presence of Judaism among the American Negroes.